of our series on the Ritchie Boys, and it is my great pleasure to introduce Stan Dara as our presenter. But before I present Stan, I just wanted to mention that everyone should please mute yourselves.
I'm trying to figure out.
And also, if you have questions, please put them in the chat box, and we will answer your questions at the end of Stan's presentation.
I was trying to figure out where my Zoom thing was. Okay, hang on a second, everybody.
Okay.
Okay. So
My pleasure for Stan to be our presenter.
thank you, Annette. Thank you. So we left off last week with our three Ritchie boys, Guy, Stephen, and Manny, made it to
Wait a second. Just wait a minute, everybody. Stanley, you have to wait a second because I didn't do my sharing.
oh yeah, you gotta share.
Okay, wait, let me get back onto my Zoom. Sorry, everybody. Okay.
My tech expert is not quite expert yet.
Okay, there we go.
Sharing audio.
Yes,
too?
yes.
Right, so we left Guy, Stephen, and Manny at Camp Ritchie. So let me start the program by, you go to the next slide. Okay.
Yeah, but this is
Okay.
not, this is,
Oh, so you're in the beginning now. You gotta get
Yeah.
back. Okay.
everybody hang on.
Right.
Excuse me. Oh my gosh. Okay, hang on, everybody. Something just went crazy here. All right.
Right, 33.
Yes.
33.
33 from current.
Is that 33? No.
Oh. Slide 33
Okay, right there.
from current slide.
Okay.
I apologize. Thank
Okay.
you.
Even the great ones make a mistake every once in a while, as Nadine just showed. All right, so our three heroes are at Camp Ritchie, and what are they doing at Camp Ritchie? Okay, so yeah, you can go here. Okay, so the Pentagon search for Camp Ritchie candidates started with foreign language fluency. That was the key, and it was basically German and Italian is what they wanted. The commander of the base, his name was Colonel Banfill, and he was given absolutely full authority to transfer any GI to Camp Ritchie. If they qualified for the mission, he had that right to grab them out of any unit they were in and bring them for training at Camp Ritchie. So one of the required courses was known as IPW, which was Interrogation of Prisoners of War. And I think if we had to focus on one objective of these guys, it was to interrogate prisoners and to get information. Now that course was split into two different sessions. One was known as IPWGE, Interrogation of Prisoners of War, German, and the other one was IPWIT, which was Interrogation of Italian Prisoners. There was also very important courses which dealt with photo interpretation and terrain maps. And this way, if they come across any maps that they get from prisoners, they'll be able to read them. The classes were very, very strenuous. Approximately 40% dropped out. I remember when I started college, the freshman orientation, whoever gave the orientation said, look to your right and look to your left more than likely, one of you are not going to graduate in 4 years. So roughly 40% of each monthly class dropped out. And what made these programs so different than typical military unit is that Camp Ritchie became a training facility for soldiers who were actually intellectuals. So in this group, we had writers, artists, filmmakers, and teachers. Now, the most challenging course that they took was known as Order of Battle. And students needed to learn everything there was to know about the enemy, in this case, basically the Germans. So that meant they needed to know all the German ranks, the uniform insignias, and the chain of command. Now, Guy and Stephen and Manny and all the other German Jewish Ritchie boys, they were so valuable to the war effort because not only is what they learned at Camp Ritchie, but they knew the culture and the psyche of Germans better than anyone else. They're familiar with the workings of the German minds. Their innate knowledge of the enemy can never be taught to American-born soldiers. So we watched a piece of an interview last week with Guy Stern, and I'm going to go back to that one. That was done on Veterans Radio. But before we do that, let's look at these photos that are up. So, everyone calls it Camp Ritchie, but it's really Fort Ritchie. And that's the upper left-hand picture. And the one directly below that are the barracks from Camp Ritchie. One of the classes is in the upper middle. I can't tell you if that's any of the guys that I'm talking about, but that's a class picture, probably close to a graduation picture, I would think. The upper right hand is a classroom. See, they all got headsets. The lower right and the lower left are also training, and you can see they're learning the Heil Hitler salute to be able to do that if they need to disguise as Germans. And I'm not too sure what they're learning on the left slide. And the middle one is a plaque that is found at the camp. So we're going to move on to this Guy interview. We saw a piece of it, but he's going to talk about training now. Nadine's going to move it to 5 minutes.
Oh, here we are. I'm back.
5:30.
Okay. Oops.
Yeah, the volume, right? Oh, yeah.
Texas, and then was transferred on orders that I could not open immediately, as the lieutenant told me. But I found out quick enough I was headed for the military intelligence MITC training camp, and that started me on my career as a interrogator and interpreter of German written material or printed material that I was able to get a hold of.
Well, one of the things that I learned about the Ritchie Boys for our listening audience, there's a great documentary out there called The Ritchie Boys. You can find it on YouTube and other places. And Guy was a participant in that along with a number of his other buddies. It's really a nice way of telling your story. And the training was very intense there at Camp Ritchie. And you were actually, they called it, you guys kind of renamed it to Military Institute of Total Confusion.
That is correct. We had a sense of humor.
That is true. So can you tell me a little bit about what your training involved?
Yes, it was every aspect of intelligence work, ranging from the Morse code to reading aerial maps, uh, drawing maps on very limited, confined to limited territory, and learning some of the methods of interrogating, of methods of looking for hints that appeared, say, by some chance, got through the censor in German newspapers, and to be very watchful for information that would be of strategic or tactical value to our armed forces. I was eventually put in charge of of answering all the various inquiries that came from units, from the quartermaster to the medics, to the artillery, who wanted to have certain specified information, and it was our job. I was, in fact, then head of the survey section, and we gathered all the information we could. And as I found out later, from an historian of American intelligence, that more than 60% of the valuable information needed for our warfare came from the Ritchie Boys. We were decorated as a unit for that, and yes, it was a good fight.
It was a good fight. So after you were at Camp Ritchie, and
Okay, yeah, let's
you
move
were
on. Okay.
deployed.
I have a video here that's actually
The
only
term?
about 20 seconds we're going to watch of what Manny says about training. So that goes to 25 minutes.
In stark contrast, Manfred was drafted into the United States Army and became one of the few German Jews able to fight back against the Nazis. With his perfect German, Manfred was trained as an interpreter and an order of battle specialist. Promoted to staff sergeant, he was assigned to military intelligence and sent to England.
Okay.
Joining the 82nd
That's the training
Airborne Division.
that I found on Manny. Okay, so we're going to go back to Guy, and we're now going to talk about what happened during the war. So now we're looking at so the upper left and the middle upper is Guy. So let me tell you about what happened with Guy Stern when he came out of Camp Ritchie. So Guy received orders to be part of the IPW team attached to the First Army in England. 3 days after D-Day, he found himself on a landing craft heading to Omaha Beach. His first assignment was to interrogate the captured Germans to learn as much as possible about the coastal defense set up by the Germans. After a few initial interrogations, the captain of the team assigned Guy to learn about German strategic tactics. And I do want to interrupt what I wanted to say here. So Guy is with the First Army in England, and every one of these Ritchie boys was assigned to a specific unit. It wasn't like the Ritchie boys were all out doing interrogations on their own. Everyone was involved with a different Army unit. So the captain put him in charge of interrogators to evaluate the morale of German troops and to learn the most and least effective of US propaganda leaflets. So that's something we don't even think about, you know. So the US is dropping leaflets down on the enemy and they're reading it, and his job was to find out which ones really worked and which ones didn't work. I think that's some pretty good information to have. So he put in a report that 90% of the German fighting men believed the war was hopeless. Guy was teamed with another Ritchie boy by the name of Fred Howard, who Guy actually became lifetime friends with Fred. And their mission was to provide bomber crews with the location of industrial targets. Now, how important is that to find out, where they're sending the message to the Air Force to drop their bombs? So the two quickly learned that the biggest fear German prisoners had was that they would be turned over to the Russians. Apparently, we were kind to our prisoners, and the Russians had a reputation of being the exact opposite. So using that threat, they obtained incredible tactical information. Guy even got a German prisoner to turn over his diary to him, which had much classified information, including German equipment, personnel, and armaments. Now, one of Guy's hardest tasks, and we'll learn he was not successful at this, was attempting to get a German prisoner to confess to killing two Ritchie boys by the name of Kurt Jacobs and Murray Zappler. And they were killed basically because they were Jewish. And although he absolutely knew this German was guilty, he was not able to get him to confess. However, the German, whose name was Kurt Bruns, B-R-U-N-S, was later found guilty and faced a firing squad for the murder of the two Ritchie boys. And I want to go back to that same interview we just watched with Guy, and he's going to talk about this Russian.
Oh, here we are. I'm back on here.
1234.
To place Camp Ritchie had superbly prepared us for what our assignment continued to be for the rest of the war.
Okay, well, we're talking here with Guy Stern, who was one of the Ritchie boys, and he was sent back to Europe. He was originally from Germany, and he was sent back during World War II to act as an interrogator for captured German POWs. So my question, I guess, is how long did it take you to get across France, or back into Germany? This June of 1944. When did you finally get to Germany?
Well, I can't pinpoint that, but any history book can tell us how we advanced through the Battle of Falaise-Argenton in France, how we went on through Belgium, finally got to Germany, and that must have been maybe I can't specify, but it was quickly. It wasn't quickly, so it was. And then we were in the setback by the Battle of the Bulge, the German counterattack. Also, we had to retreat after that temporary defeat until our Air Force, prevented before by bad weather, could help us and mash the German advances.
Yeah, and then you ended up back in Germany. There is one story that you are well known for, and that is your pretending to be a Russian commissar. And can you tell me how that came about, and why would the Germans be afraid of you?
Yes, that's exactly was the premise, that we could scare them in interrogation, which otherwise they would see right through, that we were trying to get vital information for the Air Force on landmarks, for targets, on the movement of, say, one factory to another place where we needed to locate it, or the Air Force asked, we are not quite sure whether we knocked out this factory completely. Can you get some inside information from a prisoner? So that all fell into place. And I think the only real obstacle we had is when we used our various deceptive devices to get information on ordinary questions that we asked. We could disguise the questions so that the Germans would still would be tricked into giving away valuable information. On the other hand, when we asked about stuff for the Air Force, an assignment that fell to my friend Fred Howard, then the Germans could see through it, because why would you ask for landmarks to an optic factory, or whether a factory had rail connections to the main system of railroads, of tracks, and they knew immediately we asked that for the purpose of bombing them. So they refused answering until we found a method of scaring them into answering, and that was that we had known through the war that the Germans were deathly afraid of being confined in a Russian pre-W camp, because there were memories that they had of having been rather brutal while attacking the Soviet Union. And so we found a way to exploit that fear. After we discussed all sorts of possibilities, and then I disguised myself as a Russian commissar. And my tent was identified as that of Commissar Krukov, liaison officer. That sign was in 3 languages, and inside the tent where Fred brought every reluctant prisoner, there was a picture autographed to Commissar Krukov by Comrade Stalin, and some of them saw that. So they really believed, or many believed, in fact, most believed that we were able to get a Russian there, and that he would take them and ship them to the salt mines in Russia. And that scared them, or many of them, sufficiently to give us even the information about Air Force targets, about landmarks, and the like.
Yes.
Well, you had
Okay. So that's pretty cool. I don't think any of us here, without learning about this, would think that here we are, have American GIs disguised as Russian
to discuss.
commissars to get information. That was pretty awesome of what he and his friend did. So I want to tell you now about Stephen Louis in the war. And Stephen is the lower 2 left pictures. One, he's driving the Jeep. I'm not sure who's behind that. And then him looks awfully young right there. So Stephen Lewin was assigned with the 6th Army Division, and they crossed the English Channel on July 19th, 1944, arriving at Utah Beach. So over the next few days, the 6th Army Division, which was known as the Super 6th, liberated several cities and captured 800 prisoners in the process. Stephen's team searched houses and offices to locate German intelligence reports. At headquarters, General Patton visited often, and Stephen was present for some of those briefings. During fierce fighting at Brest, a German lieutenant by the name of Lieutenant General by the name of Karl Spang, he happened to be commander of Germany's 206th Infantry Division, was taken prisoner. Stephen and his team were responsible for interrogating this high-ranking officer. With the intelligence gathered, the 266th Infantry Division was defeated without firing one single shot. Amazing by Stephen Lewin. As the 6th Division moved east across France, Stephen's team needed to keep the operation maps up to date. Stephen moved east with the 6th Army Division during the Battle of the Bulge. During this battle, Stephen interrogated many captured Germans along with an SS major. After Germany's unconditional surrender, Stephen volunteered to round up all remaining Nazi leaders. Even though many were released after a short period of time, Stephen was gratified that he was disrupting their lives as the Nazis did to him and his family. And now I'm going to move on to, and Manny's in the two right pictures. And you can see Manny is a staff sergeant. You see that in the upper left. That's an E6 in the Army. I made it to E5. I never made it to E6. And I'm not sure who he's hands with. Maybe French soldiers. I'm not too sure about that. So after graduating from Camp Ritchie, Manny crossed the Atlantic on June 6, 1944. Everybody knows what that date is. He actually came across on D-Day. 1 month later, this is a great story. He was assigned East Airborne as an order battle specialist. Now here he is with the 82nd Airborne. Do you know what Manny has never done? He never jumped out of a plane. Everyone else in his unit had jump training. So he needed to make his first jump, and he did qualify as a parachutist. And unlike other Jewish Ritchie boys, and this I find this really interesting, Manny never changed his name during the war, and he had an H on his dog tags, which stand for Hebrew. Many of the German Jewish Ritchie, they were wearing fake ID tags, so if they got captured, they wouldn't be identified as Jewish. Manny said, "The heck with that. I'm Jewish, and I'm going to show it." He decided he was a German Jew. So Manny found themselves in Holland in the 5th year of German occupation. Manny was assigned to an observation post near the Holland-Germany border. He was interrogating prisoners as they were captured and then passing the information on to headquarters. There constantly was small arms fighting. Throughout this time, This is during this shooting that's going on. Manny and his partner, Sergeant Wynn, dug a 6x6 hole, pitched a tent over it with sandbags around. This was their home during their stay in Holland. With the 82nd Airborne across the Elbe River in a captured German was looking for. He's that the 21st German Manny part of the surrender meeting. So that's a real short story of the three of them during the war. And I want to move on and talk about the aftermath, which is the days pretty much after the fighting, and then what these three guys did with their new life. So let's go back to Guy Stern. And now we can see.
Sorry, folks.
We got a jumping PowerPoint. No, what happened here?
Oh my goodness, the same thing just happened. Okay, PowerPoint.
Oh, here we
Okay. All right. there we
Okay,
go. All
sorry.
right. So there's Guy Stern as a very grown man. The one in the middle, and I think this is all going to come out, but the one in the upper middle, that's his autobiography. And I think we talked about his father's advice, telling him and his brother to be like invisible ink. All right, so Guy was at First Army Headquarters, known as Bad Hersfeld. And if I'm pronouncing any of these German words wrong, I apologize. It was 90 miles west of Buchenwald. So interrogating many German prisoners of war during his march through Germany, he found that the Third Reich soldiers were unwilling or unable to realize the enormity of what they had done or take any responsibility for what they had done. They all claimed they were just lowly soldiers doing their job, following orders. Now he was ready to see the horror with his own eyes. Guy came to Buchenwald 3 days after its liberation with several members of his team. The liberated prisoners looked more dead than alive. They enthusiastically welcomed their liberators and anxious to hug anyone wearing a U.S. Army uniform. Large containers of drinking water were set up around the camp. Guy saw a man returning to his old habits of drinking from a muddy puddle. A GI directed the man to the freshwater containers. Guy noticed many of the freedmen still cowering, expecting to see the SS guards. When Guy stopped to speak to survivors, another inmate standing nearby berated his fellow survivors for not coming to attention as they were required to do. Old habits were hard to break. In a conversation Guy had with a U.S. Army doctor, he was told that many of the survivors will not make it. Even with the food, water, and medicine, their health has deteriorated beyond repair. Guy saw German civilians carting away mounds of naked bodies in various stages of decomposition. He could no longer hold back his tears. A friend of his, MP by the name of Master Sergeant Hadley was also viewing the scene. Guy stepped away because he did not want to see his friend, he wanted his friend to see Guy crying. Then he noticed his friend, a big Midwestern Protestant, was also crying. The trip back to the First Army headquarters was pretty much silent, as all were very affected by what they witnessed. This is the first and last concentration camp that Guy ever visited. When he boarded the SS Hamburg in 1937, he believed with all his heart that he would see his parents, brother, and sister again. But what he saw on that day took away any hope he had of reuniting with his family. 3 weeks after the war ended, Guy was stationed at Koblenz. He asked for permission to visit Hildesheim, his hometown 250 miles to the south. He needed British approval because Hildesheim was in the British sector. As the Jeep rolled into town, Guy could not believe the devastation of a German post-war town. The things he remembered: the soccer stadium was destroyed and the youth gym club no longer was standing. He found the street where he grew up. His house was only rubble. The lot where the synagogue stood was completely barren, as the synagogue was burned during Kristallnacht in 1938. With a policeman's help, Guy located the Ebeling family. Gerhard Ebeling was one of the few Gentile classmates of Guy's to remain somewhat friendly after the Nazis. Gerhard's father was the customs officer who did not inspect Guy's luggage. When Mrs. Ebeling opened the door and saw Guy, she immediately started crying and hugged him. She told Guy that Gerhard was drafted into the Wehrmacht, the army, and is being held by the British as a prisoner of war. Guy assured her that her son will be returning, knowing that the British were processing them for return. Now it was time for Guy to have that difficult conversation about the Jews of Hildesheim, and particularly the Stern family with the Ebelings. Guy was told that the Nazis created Jew houses, where the Jewish families was forced from their homes and moved into these overcrowded houses. There were 8 of these in the town that housed all the Jews, including the Stern family. They were then sent away in transports. Mr. Ebeling told Guy they were allowed 100 pounds of luggage and were told to bring all their cash, savings books, and jewelry with them. They were strip searched prior to boarding, and all valuables were confiscated. Herr Ebeling told Guy that he heard that the train they were put on was heading to Warsaw in Poland. Since Guy got a letter from his mother in 1942, he realized now how she got to Poland. Throughout the story, Mrs. Ebeling was in tears. Guy remembers his mother telling him that the Ebelings were appalled by the Nazi brutality. Herr Ebeling had to be careful not to offend the Nazis to keep his position at the customs office. Finally, Herr Ebeling looked at Guy and sadly said, "None came back from Warsaw. Gunther, I fear your family will not return." At this point, Guy knew very little about the Warsaw Ghetto, the transport from Warsaw to Treblinka, nor the horrors of what occurred at Treblinka. This journey to his hometown erased any glimmer of hope that he would be reunited with his family. The truth was inescapable. He had no intention of ever returning to Hildesheim. Excuse me if I choke up a little when I talk about this. After discharge from the military service, Guy moved to New York City. He got his BA from Hofstra University and then an MA and a PhD from Columbia University. He became a professor of German studies. For the next 50 years, he taught at Columbia University, University of Cincinnati, and Wayne State University. At Wayne State, Guy became a distinguished professor emeritus. He served as the director of the International Institute of the Righteous at the Holocaust Memorial Center in Farmington Hills, Michigan. He married Judith, who died in 2003, and then married Susanna. They lived in West Bloomfield, Michigan. Although Guy in 1945 said he had no intention of returning to Hildesheim, he did return in the 1960s to dedicate the new synagogue. He then returned again in 2012, where he was named an honorary citizen in recognition of, and I'll quote this, conciliatory efforts and for the dialogue between the religions and cultures. A plaque was placed where his family used to live, stating, "The Jewish family Stern lived here until its deportation in March 1942. Father Julius Stern, Mother Hedwig, and the siblings Werner and Eleanor were murdered." So throughout his lifetime, as we saw by some of these videos that I'm showing you, Guy was a very, very active of telling the story of being a Holocaust survivor. And Guy also stayed friendly with many of the Ritchie boys, especially Fred Howard, who he worked closely with interrogating German prisoners. In 2007, Guy was named a Knight of the Legion of Honor, and I believe that is the medal that we see in the lower middle, for his role in liberating France. When asked about his years as a Ritchie boy, Guy said, and I'm going to quote Guy Stern, "Eisenhower called it a crusade in Europe. It was that. But for us, the German Jewish refugee soldiers, it was a private crusade. We had to defeat the Nazis." At age 99, Guy Stern is one of the last survivors of the Ritchie boys. He still gives interviews and talks about his life experiences. And now we're going to move on to Stephen Louis. So here's some photos of Stephen Louis, and you see the Bronze Star hanging in the upper right-hand picture. The lower right is is taken from actually a TV screen. He was awarded as Senior of the Year in Erie County, Pennsylvania. The lower middle, that's the same medal that Guy Stern got, the French Legion of Honor. On the lower left, he's meeting with the French Consul General. I believe that's when he was awarded the Legion of Honor. And the piece on the upper left is, I think, taken from a magazine. Oh, that was from his obituary, actually. We'll talk about that. So Stephen was with the 6th Armored Division, as I said, the Super 6, when the unit received an urgent message to deliver food, water, and medical help for concentration camp survivors. He left the next day with his unit to Buchenwald. He was totally unprepared for what he witnessed. The living, the dying, and the dead were all mixed together. There were roughly 20,000 surviving prisoners, with only 4,000 of them being Jewish. Seeing the gratitude of the survivors, knowing that their suffering is now over, Stephen felt great satisfaction in liberating the camp. Stephen formed a workforce of civilians from the nearest town of Weimar to help clean the camp and bury the dead. He told the mayor of the town that he needs 100 townspeople per day until the work is done. What he heard in German from these workers was, and here's two of the regular quotes that everybody who was involved heard. One, we didn't know. And number two, no one told us. Stephen could not tolerate these excuses. It was impossible not to know. As he left Buchenwald behind, Stephen realized that it was a miracle that his father and stepmother made their way to America. It made him realize that his father's decision in 1939 to put Stephen in the care of the Jewish Rescue Organization in France saved his life. After his discharge from the service, Stephen returned to Boston. He went to night school to get his high school diploma and then a business degree from Northeastern University. He eventually obtained his CPA and spent his working career in finance for 2 different hotel chains, becoming senior vice president and treasurer of Omni International Hotels. He and his wife, Frances, had 2 children. Stephen learned many years later that the Chateau Chaban in France was taken over by the Nazis, and many of his friends were arrested and killed at Auschwitz. He returned to Berlin in 1990 and saw a plaque in front of the orphanage where he lived for 7 years, memorializing the 100 Jewish children and 12 Jewish teachers who were deported and murdered in 1942. When he saw the movie Schindler's List in 1993, it inspired him to tell his Holocaust war story. So approximately 40 years, he kept quiet. It wasn't until he saw Schindler's List that he started telling about what happened. A teacher friend of his invited Stephen to speak to her class. Since then, he has told his story to tens of thousands of school children. He always ends his story by saying, and I'm going to quote him, "When I look into their faces as they listen to my story, I have hope that I can make a difference. My story shows what can happen if people do not act. Perhaps if enough people hear these stories, history will not repeat itself. I only hope the world has learned a lesson." Stephen died on November 9th, 2021, approximately 1 month ago. And now we're going to move on to our third Ritchie boy, Manny Steinfeld. So Manny, the picture third on the right, he's with his wife. And the one all the way on the right is a memoir that he wrote, A Life Complete, The Journey of Manfred Steinfeld. So I want to point out the upper left picture. Here he is working on a chair. Well, he was more than a worker. For about 40 years, he was the chief executive officer of Shelby Williams Design, a very, very successful furniture company. So let me tell you about Manny Steinfeld as you look at these photos. Shortly after the German surrender, Manny's unit was dispatched to the Wobeline concentration camp. Manny stepped out of a Jeep prior to entering the camp. He couldn't help but notice the stench of death in the air and the living skeletons in the camp. He was not able to enter the camp. The last he heard from his mother in 1941 was that the 6 Jewish families in Yospak were being deported to Poland. At this point, Manny did not know their fate. The fear of finding his family in the camp held him back from entering the camp for a while. Manny did assist in making the funeral arrangements for those prisoners found dead. He was shocked at the lack of sympathy shown by the locals who were forced to attend the funeral. The 2 common phrases he kept hearing, "We didn't know," and "I am no Nazi." Even though they lived 3 miles from the camp, the chaplain of the 82nd Airborne gave the eulogy, and I think these words are just absolutely incredible. This is from the eulogy of the chaplain from the 82nd Airborne outside the Wobeline concentration camp. "The world has been horrified at the crimes of the German nation. These crimes were never really brought to light until the armies of the United Nations overran Germany. This is not war as conducted by international rules of warfare. This is murder, such as is not even known among savages. Though you claim no knowledge of these acts, you are still individually and collectively responsible for these atrocities, for they were committed by a government elected to office by yourselves in 1933 and continued in office by your indifference to organized brutality. It should be the firm resolve of the German people that never again should any leader or any party bring them to such moral degradation as is exhibited here." Those are some very, very powerful words. In May 1945, Manny returned to Yospak to try to find out what happened to his mother, brother, and sister. He only learned that they and the remaining Jewish families from Yospak were deported. After Manny returned to the United States, he learned that his brother Herbert was killed in Palestine by British soldiers in the battle to free Palestine. And I guess it's not the greatest news to hear that your brother was killed, but I think he was in a very noble effort to create the state of Israel. It took years for Manny to learn about his mother and sister. They were deported to the Riga ghetto in Latvia and then sent to the Stutthof concentration camp. And let's watch a piece of the same video that we watched before, but we're gonna see where 2231.
But eventually the Nazis found them, and they were arrested and deported. A teenager at the time, Hans was there the day it happened.
Ein Lastwagen ohne Fenster, da haben sie deine Mutti und deine Schwester Det var det då.
He's given a description when they arrested my mother and sister and took her away.
Jeg har ikke ladet mere.
When they took her away right here, I mean, this is where the truck was. I mean, no windows, and he remembered very distinctly.
Wir haben als Kinder dabei gestanden. Haben geweint.
Everybody was crying when they were taken away. Everybody was crying when they were taken away.
It wasn't till years later that Manfred learned that his mother and sister had been deported to the Riga ghetto in Latvia. Among thousands of Jews crowded into an area less than a square mile, they lived under inhumane conditions and worked as slave laborers in the Nazi factories.
Here's a photo of my sister taken in 1937. And I have no photos after this date, with the exception when they were deported to Riga, Latvia. In one of the books on the Riga ghetto, or the history of the Jews of Latvia, there's a photo, Jewish women from the Riga ghetto on the way to work. And in this photo, I've identified my sister. Without a doubt, it's her. And looking at the side pocket of the coat this woman is wearing, with the side pocket of the coat that she was wearing in this photo in 1939. She has on the same hat and the same coat, a coat with a double flap on the pocket. That's her going to work as a forced laborer in a munition plant. This was the coat she took with her when they were deported, the coat and the hat, in fact. And she was wearing it in 1942 when this photo was taken.
Along with all the other Jews from the Riga ghetto, Manfred's mother and sister were transferred from one hell to another. Taken to Stutthof, 22 miles east of Danzig in today's Poland, they were fated to be among the tens of thousands who perished in that infamous death camp.
All right. These are tough stories, but let's move on now and continue our story of Manny Steinfeld. So in 2001, Manny visited the Stutthof concentration camp museum, where the Nazis kept very good records. His mother died on December 30th, 1944, and his sister 10 days later. Cause of death for both of them was listed as heart failure, which was pretty much the cause of death for all the murdered victims. Manny and his wife, Fern, raised a family of 3 children, Michael, Paul, and Jill, and they lived in Chicago. Manny and Fern have 11 grandchildren. Manny was awarded the Bronze Star and a Purple Heart for wounds he received parachuting into Holland. He became a very, very successful furniture manufacturer. The company is called Shelby Williams, which Manny owned from 1954 to 1999, producing over 30 million chairs and employing 2,200 people. He and his wife were founders of the United States Holocaust Museum. They endowed the Hospitality and Tourism School at Roosevelt University. They established a Judaic Studies program at the University of Tennessee. Manny was named Volunteer of the Year in 1995 at the University of Tennessee. They established the Art Institute of Chicago. They endowed a chair at the Weizmann Institute in Israel. They also built the Naftali Steinfeld Education Center in Jerusalem and in Yosbak in memory of his brother, Herbert Naftali. In 1999, Manny was elected chairman of the Jewish Federation of Chicago. With his wife, they established over 500 scholarships at the University of Tennessee, at Roosevelt University, at the Illinois Institute of Technology, and at Brandeis University. In memory of his grandson, Danny, who died of leukemia, they dedicated a park, a playground, a leukemia research facility at Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem, and at St. Jude's in Memphis. Manny was honored by many other Jewish organizations and non-Jewish organizations for his financial and time commitments. He was the true definition of a philanthropist. Manny passed away at age 95 on July 3rd, 2019. His funeral was held in Skokie, Illinois, which is known as a town that houses many, many Holocaust survivors. He was a true hero. So to close my program, you guys can read along with me, but in researching these three incredible men, I came to a realization that never really hit me before. The accomplishments of Guy, Stephen, and Manny got me thinking about what the world lost by the murder of 6 million Jews. Think about the accomplishments that might have occurred if this terrible time in history did not occur. Who knows how many Steven Spielbergs, Ruth Bader Ginsburgs, Jonas Salks, world leaders, humanitarians, or locally, Josh Steins, Mandy Cohen's, Lucy Dinners, and just good family people we could have had. And that closes my program.
Stop sharing.
Yeah, we'll stop sharing and let me sort of catch my breath here. That wasn't easy to say. It wasn't easy to write, and I'm sure it wasn't easy to listen to. But thank you all for sticking with me, and I'd love to hear any comments, anything. I don't know.
Yeah, we don't have any questions right now in the chat room.
Okay, all right.
Well, if anyone has any comments or questions or anything you'd like to add, personal stories, you please unmute yourself and
Just
Yeah.
thank you for doing this. As painful as it was for you to research and painful as it is to hear, it's important to know.
It is important to know.
I
I thank you for doing this too. It's lovely.
yeah, I kind of think it's something in our history that very few people even knew about the Ritchie Boys because it was so secret and they never talked about it for such a very long period of time. And now that all of this has been coming out, it is unbelievable to know their story.
So I mentioned last week, if you guys are on the gallery view, you see Jeffrey, and Jeffrey's father and uncle
Where's Jeffrey?
were Ritchie Boys, right? Is your sister still with us? She started. Yes, Susan, okay. So I don't know if you guys want to.
I'm here.
You guys want to add something maybe about your dad, your uncle, either one of them? I want to, me personally, after researching this program, I want to personally thank you for what your fathers did. It's kind of amazing. It really
Thank
is.
you. It's interesting today. Our uncle's daughter emailed all of the cousins today. It happens today to be the 113th, would have been the 113th birthday of our uncle, who was a Ritchie boy. I don't know. I mean, these three talked a lot about their experiences, and we heard very little about them, right, Jeff?
Right.
Yeah.
You know, I guess they were very preoccupied and busy,
Right.
forming what was a very successful life for themselves after being in the Army.
Yeah.
They were very resourceful people and did very well for themselves.
Yeah,
So-
and I don't think it was just the Ritchie Boys. I think so many of the
Right.
World War II veterans just did not talk about it, just like
Right.
Vietnam. I mean, the guys returning from Vietnam didn't really talk about what happened over there, you know. And now with the Ritchie Boys, it's a little different because this was top secret for a while. I'm not too sure at what point they were allowed to talk about it, but for a number of years, they were not even allowed to talk about it.
Right.
We
I
were,
think
we were
that's
not
why-
aware of that.
Right.
We
No.
weren't aware, it was secret. But, you know, it's interesting, our father and our uncle had quite different experiences serving as Ritchie Boys in Europe. Our uncle, like the people you focused on, was on the ground in France, in Germany. We're going to try to get a hold of Guy Stern and ask him if he knew our uncle, because our uncle also, we believe, went to Buchenwald
Yeah.
in the liberation.
Right.
I suggest you
and-
hurry up and try and contact.
Oh,
them.
yeah.
It's
That's right,
almost
that's right.
100 years old now.
Yeah.
Do you have
And,
any,
our-
do you have any idea how to get in touch with him?
No, let me do a little more research. Maybe I can I'm sure one of these organizations that I mentioned that he's involved with probably can contact him. You know,
Yeah.
the interview on what was that, Veterans Radio, that was not done all that long ago because you saw it. It's kind of on Zoom, so
Right.
it was probably done during COVID, that interview. I'm not sure when it was, but
Right.
that would be my guess. That might be a good starting point.
Yeah.
But
They
I
certainly,
just wanted to,
go ahead, Jeff.
go ahead, Susie. I just wanted to mention that in contrast to our Uncle Jules, who served on the ground, our father was in London, working in what I imagine was an office set with captured documents. And one of the he told us is that the people he served were extraordinary people. I mean, the one whose name I remember was Fred Heckinger,
Right.
whose name might be familiar to you. He was the education editor for a long time of the Times. He was a rich boy, and just an
He was a Ritchie boy?
extraordinary experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah. And so, you know, I think our Uncle Jules had a life of action, and our dad, Stephen Leiter, and I'll add one more thing about his name. It was more of an office kind of setting. His name when he was growing up in Germany was Max Leiter. And he, like I think a lot of these other people, was given the opportunity when he was inducted into the army to change his name so it wouldn't be so German. And on the spur of the moment, he changed it to Stephen. He renamed himself after Franklin Roosevelt's press secretary, Stephen Early, and he kept Max as his middle name. So,
yeah. And I'll just throw some statistics out on the Ritchie Boys. I got this book in front of me. I think you might find this interesting. So I think I told you there were 16,000 Ritchie Boys. Approximately 2,000 were Jewish, but there was 50 Ritchie Boys that actually died during the war, killed during the war. And I mentioned 2 of them that were shot by this German.
Jacobs was the one you mentioned.
Did I mention
Yes,
Kurt Jacobs? I forgot the other name that it was. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. And it's fascinating. Please, if you get a chance, read this. Like I said, it's available in the Wake County Library. Sons and Soldiers by Bruce Henderson. It's well written, it's easy
Right.
reading,
Well.
and,
so
and,
easy.
and it focuses on a few more Ritchie Boys than the ones I talked about. So, anything else? Now, I do want to make an announcement that, we're scheduled to do a program
The last.
next Wednesday. And I'm almost positive it's not going to happen next Wednesday. And the reason for that, it's not my program, it's Larry Pearlman's program. And Larry can't do it next Wednesday. He has another engagement. He asked me if I would do it. And I looked at his program, and the fact that I just really don't know anything about it, it's just showing slides and reading it. I want to put it back on him. So we're going to get a date that works for him and works for Temple Beth Orr, and we'll reschedule that out. So, but other than that, it's been a pleasure talking to you guys. Don't miss services this Friday, whether on Zoom or in person, as we have the new police commissioner coming to talk in Temple. I think she's going to talk after the service. I think it's going to be about 7:30, 7:40, something like that. And if you'll be in the building, I'll see you there. So I look forward to it. I thank you, Annette, for all you do for our committee and hosting this program here. So we appreciate it. Maddie, have a safe trip back from Syracuse through the snow and all that. And Richard, I hope you enjoyed your trip, Richard. You're back. Okay.
And Maxine?
And Stan and Nadine and Annette, if you need me to take you through the museum sometime, give me a call and I'll give you a
I'll
tour.
be happy to do that. It's been years and years and years since we had a tour of the Judaic exhibit at the museum.
And they're going to close down this spring and rehang everything and move everything.
Oh,
So
okay.
this is a good time to come now before things get in shutdown mode.
And I think I read just this week that the museum is back open, right? Anybody could just walk in with, yeah. Okay, that's great. That is
With a
great.
mask.
Maxine,
With a
I'll be
mask.
thinking about you.
Good night, everybody. Thank you
I'll be
again.
thinking about
Good
you.
night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
All right, thank